Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at another gem by Kadir. This is a Devise API gem. We've seen a couple of their gems in the past. They've always been pretty good, and this one's no different. This will let us set up a Devise API very quickly, and we're going to walk through how to do that today. The way we're going to do it is with a quick little Vite app. This is going to be using vanilla JavaScript so that you can convert this into whatever you prefer to use. And it's just a way for you to create like a test 100 account at, I don't know, example.com, and then give it a password and a password. You can hit submit, it logs you in. You can then refresh, you're still logged in. You can click log out, you can refresh, you can log in with that same information, and you're good to go. And if you're logged in and you access the page, you go to a restricted page, which returns that you are logged in as that email. So this is coming from the backend right here. So if we come over here in our console, we should hopefully see, if I refresh, that in here we respond with the access token and the refresh token. We get the restricted action, and then the restricted action replies with a message. And then the restricted action replies with a message that I can hopefully show you is being logged out. If we look at the example code for this, when we come into our user can access function, in here we can hopefully see that we are console logging the data.message in a cyan color. And of course, the thing I just showed you was a cyan error message, or a cyan console log right here. So that's coming from our backend. So let's go ahead, let's just create this real quick. It's actually pretty fast. I had ChatGPT generate the vanilla JS front end, so that's why it probably looks better than what I normally do. To get started, we just have to create a Rails app. We'll say Rails new video, and we'll pass in a -- API flag because it's an API, and this lets us skip all of the front end stuff. We can then cd into our video. We can do a bundle add for Devise, of course, and then we can add the Devise -API gem. This is going to be a pretty similar setup to how we usually do Devise, which is really nice. It's familiar grounds. So for Devise, we do a Rails G Devise :install, and then we do a and Rails G Devise user. This installs and sets up our user model. Now for the Devise API, we do a Rails G Devise _API :install, and that's the same configuration process. At this point, you can open up your VS Code, and in your VS Code, you're going to want to come in your config, your initializers, and your cores.rb. In your cores.rb, you're going to want to uncomment all of this, and because we're just messing around with a demo app, we're going to allow every API or every IP to connect to it. Once we do that, we can close our cores.rb, and we can come back down to our gem file to verify that cores rack is installed. In my case, it's commented out because it's a fresh app. So I'm going to uncomment it, and then I'm going to run a bundle command in our terminal. At this point, I'm going to do a Rails G controller pages, and I'll give a home page and a restricted page. That way we can access those from our API. I'll hit Control L to clear that console, and then we can come up to our models and our user.rb. In our user.rb, we're just going to add a :API to the rest of the Devise stuff, and we're done in here. At this point, we can come into our controllers and our pages controller, and we can restrict access if we'd like to. The first thing you normally do is you tell it, hey, Rails, your authenticity tokens are kind of cringe. Skip the verification of those. The next thing we can do is set it to do a before action to authenticate Devise API token, and only do this for the restricted action. We can then say our Devise API token is our current Devise API token. And then if you're so inclined, you can render a response of some sort. In my case, I just render some JSON with a message that says you're logged in and a status of OK, or it tells you, hey, go away, I don't like you. This is it for our Rails stuff. Actually, at this point, we're already set up and we're good to go. We can start accessing this. So to access this, we're going to create a Vite app. This is going to be from a NPM. We'll say create Vite at latest. It'll then ask us to name this project. I'll call mine front end. It'll ask me what framework to use. You can, of course, pick any of these. I'm going to go with vanilla and just a regular JavaScript. I'm now going to cd into our front end. I'm going to do a npm I to install this. It'll install really fast because Vite loves me. And then we're going to do a npm run dev to start our front end. We're going to go ahead and close our user and close our pages and close our gem file because we're done with those. And actually, I'm going to stop this server that's running our demo. I'm going to cd out of here and into our video, and then into our front end. So I'm going to run two different tabs. So in here, I'll do the npm run dev. And then in our other one, I'm going to do a Rails S. Actually, I'm going to CD out of here into our video, and then I'm going to do a Rails S just to keep both of these running. So if we refresh this one, it'll tell us to run our migrations. We're good to go. If we refresh this one, nothing will happen, of course. I'm going to go ahead and close our app and our config here and open up our front end. So in our front end, we only have two files we need to touch. One is the index and one is the main. In our index, it's pretty simple. The only thing we really want to do is tell it, hey, in the div ID of app, we'll just put a hello vt and then a area to display the username if we're so inclined. After we do that, we can then create a form, and the form is going to be a form for the sign up page. Oops, the sign up page. The sign up page, or the sign up form, is going to have a div with an ID of sign up email. That's where you put in your email. It's your input. Then it's going to have two passwords, one for the sign up password and one for the password confirmation. And then it's going to have a sign up button. This form will then use JavaScript to, grab the details from, make sure that the passwords are the same, and then do the submission. We then have a sign in form, which is similar to the sign out form. We just change all of the IDs and we only give it a password instead of a password and a password confirmation. The final step here is to create the logout button, which is going to be very intimidating, but I'm sure we'll all manage. It's just a button with an ID of sign out. After we're done with that, we have our include down here for our module, and we're now done with the index page. So the rest of this monstrosity that we're about to create is going to happen in this main.js file. Now I'm going to be going through this pretty fast because we've covered this so many times, but I'm going to make sure that I detail sort of the logic here, and I'll leave it as an exercise to the viewer to actually go through this and read the code. So we're going to create our API URL. Now this corresponds to a API URL that we can find in our GitHub documentation here. So if we want to revoke a token, so like if we're if we're logging out and we want to say, don't allow this token to let you to sign in anymore, then we go to /user/tokens. If we want to go to a refresh, so let's say we've refreshed the page, we pull our refresh token out of local storage, and we now want to get a new access token. The way it works is you keep your access, the way I assume it works is you keep your access token in a variable and you store your refresh token in local storage. Then when you get your refresh token, you don't have an access token, so you send your refresh token up to the server and then you get a new access token back. It will also return a new refresh token. And the reason why you sort of do that, my understanding is because then as soon as you've issued the refresh, you get a new token back. And now the old token, if someone had gained access to it maliciously during that time, it will no longer work. So you reduce the window for the attack to happen, is my understanding. So that's what our refresh is. We then have our sign up, pretty self-explanatory. Sign in, pretty self-explanatory. And there's a info route. Now, we're going to be using these, I think, and they're pretty easy to actually get familiar with. The key point, though, if I come back in here, is that all of these start with /users/tokens. So for our API URL, we just set this to be /user/tokens. Then we can just add like /refresh if we're so inclined. So we create a access token local variable. We create a refresh token variable. We create a resource owner. Access token, again, is the token we're going to be using if we're just logged in and browsing the page. Refresh is like our long-term access token. And then resource owner is just our user. I named this to sort of correspond to how it's named in the backend. So instead of a current user, we have a resource owner. Okay, so next step. We're going to have some const getters here that we have to deal with. We have to get our sign up form and we have to get our sign in form. We're going to do those with query selectors. For the sign up form, we're going to create that function. And it's a doozy, but it's not that bad. So you add a event listener to your sign up form. You prevent default when the submit button is clicked. We then grab the email, the password, and the password confirmation, and we get the value for each of those. We check if the emails match. If they don't, we just throw an alert, and then we return. If they did match, we can then create a response where we call await on a fetch to our API URL, which goes to /signup after this. So our API URL is going to be localhost 3000 /user/token/sign_up. We go there, we issue a post, we tell it here's an email and here's a password because we already did the password confirmation on our end. And then we give it some headers that just says content type of application /JSON. After that's done, we have two things we call. One is a handle auth response, which we can create real quick. It's going to be a function down here. Handle auth response is going to await the data, and then it's going to set the resource owner, so the user in our local storage, so we can access the email later, and then it's going to set the refresh token. We then have the access token being set to a variable, the refresh token being set to a variable, and the resource owner being set to a variable. Now, of course, this step right here, probably don't want to do this. I think ChatGPT just sort of noticed a pattern here. I would probably say you would want to just grab this from local storage. That way you don't have both of these running around in memory, because at that point it kind of defeats the purpose of the access token, right? The other thing we do here is this user session function, and this is used a couple times because it allows us to clean up some of the logic. So I'm going to come down here below the handle auth response, and I'm going to add this in. So the user session here is used to grab the refresh token if we need to, request a new access token if we need to, and then it deals with a little bit of weird debugging, and then it checks if the access token is defined at this point. So we can make it here and the access token cannot be defined, right? Like, let's say we don't have a refresh token, we didn't have an access token, we get here and now we don't have either, so we want to say this is null, right? So if this is null, which this is another helper function that we made, let me just paste this in somewhere. I'll just paste it in right here. It's just a quick check to see if this is null or if it's undefined. So if those are the case, then we don't have a current session. Then we want to say the sign up and the sign in form should be visible and the sign out button should not be visible because we can't log out if we're already logged out. Else we do have an access token. Then we want to hide the sign in and the sign up forms, and we want to display the log out button. At this point, we can create the get user function. These are kind of chained together because I had to like mimic the idea of state here. But the get user is a stored resource for the local storage where we get a resource owner. We check if the stored resource is undefined. If it is, we toggle the user div, which shows us the user account email. If I don't have it open anymore. It's just the thing that shows us the email above the log out button. Otherwise, we do have one, in which case we want to display the email, and both of those are handled by the toggle user. So this toggle user div, if I can find this somewhere in the notes application, is pretty simple. We just check if we have a resource owner. If we do, we get a reference to the user div with an ID. We then say the inner HTML should just be the user email. We set the display to block. If we don't have a resource owner, we just set the HTML to be empty and the display to be none. Okay, so that's the get user. That's the toggle user. We are now done with the user session, I believe. So at this point, we can come up here, we can collapse this as well. And I'll have a link to all of this code in the video description. We are now done with the sign up form. The sign in form is not that bad. We can actually come down here right below the sign up. We'll do the sign in. So the sign in form is going to look very similar to the sign up form. It starts by preventing default. It grabs the email and the password from the sign in fields, grabs their values. It then creates another response. This is a fetch to /sign in. So again, we have our token or user /token /sign _ in, and that takes us here. We then pass back a body with an email and a password, because remember, we don't have an access token here because the user is actually typing in the email and password. So we already know what type this is going to be. We then set the headers to be the application /JSON again. We do another await handle auth response, which was this function right here that just sets all of those things. And then we call that user session again, which was that function we created that just toggles the sign in and the sign out forms so that they switch back and forth if we get a user. So that's it for the sign in and the sign up. We have the handle auth, we have the null or undefined, we have the get user, we have the toggle user div. The next step is to come down here and we have the sign out button. So the sign out button is pretty straightforward. If you click it, we prevent default. We then do a console log saying we're logging you out. We call reset tokens, which I don't think we've defined yet. It doesn't look like it, so let's just define that real quick. Reset tokens just resets the refresh token and the resource owner in local storage, so it gets rid of them, and then it sets all three variables to be null. We then call user session again, which will then toggle the sign in and sign up forms to be visible because we've now logged out. Okay, that's it for the sign out button and the reset tokens. The next thing we want to check the next thing we probably want to do is grab the refresh token function. So I'm going to put this right below the handle auth response. We are going to get a rather ugly function here, but I'll try and walk you through it. So it tries to grab the refresh token from local storage. It checks if the refresh token is null or undefined, in which case we got nothing back from local storage, so we have to return. If we get here, we now have a refresh token. So what we try and do is we try to create a response where we do another fetch to the /refresh. We've refreshed the page. We want to do a post request with some application/JSON, but here we pass in an authorization header with a bearer and then the refresh token. At this point, we can do a check and we can see if the response is okay, or if the response is not okay and the response.status is 401, we have an error, in which case we want to redirect to a different page. But because here I'm doing all of this on one page, I don't have an example of this. You would just do some like redirection logic here. Else, we throw a response.status text if it's not a 401 error. And a 401 error is going to happen if it failed to log you in effectively. We then have some data which we get back from response.json. We have some questionable logic here because we've already done this in the whatever it was, the authorize or handle auth response section. So you could probably refactor this. But it does local storage. It sets the resource owner and the refresh token. It then sets the access token to be the data.token, which we get back from our data here. We set the refresh token to be the refresh token and the resource owner to be the resource owner. At this point, we can catch any errors if we have them, in which case we call reset tokens, because if we don't have a refresh token, then we definitely can't automatically log you in. So then everything should be set to null. And then we send we call the user session, because at this point, if we don't have a refresh token and we've reset everything to null, then we have to show the login and the sign up pages or the sign up forms again. So that's it for the refresh token function. At this point, we have effectively a full workflow here where we can check if we are logged in, if we have to sign someone out again or anything like that. But there's a couple of other things we can look at. The first one is what happens if we want to request a new access token. So we have this check in, I think, our user session where we request a new access token. So with the refresh token, we could technically do everything we're doing. But what we want to do here is if we want to, like, let's say request access to a page, we probably don't want to be passing the refresh token around all the time. So instead we can come down here and we'll just do a request new access token. So this is going to be an async function. Oops, I should probably copy it. This is going to be an async function where we first check if we have a refresh token. We then check if we have an access token, and if we have an access token, then we don't need to issue another request here. We'll just try it with the access token we have, and if that one doesn't work, then, you know, what can you do? We then have a try block where we do a const response, and this is where you can sort of tell that this was largely ChatGPT generated, because if you look at this, some of these use like try catches, and some of these use like just responses. So it's interesting how it like varies between them, but I guess this isn't like a ChatGPT video, so I'll shut up now. But we have this, we do the const response to /refresh again, and we pass in the refresh token. The refresh token will come back with a response. And at this point we can just do the handle auth response again, which will set our access token. So we come up here, that will set our access token. So it is similar to doing the refresh token, but you're really returning if you already have an access token. It's just a quick way to get a new one if you don't already have one. So it's not entirely necessary, but again, it feels weird to me. I'm not like super big into Auth, but it feels weird to me to be sitting there and going, gosh, I'm just going to pass around this token that I'm only supposed to be using for refreshing when I have like an access token concept, although they do seem a little bit redundant. And the final thing we do here is we just call a user session. We await a user session, which is our function that we created earlier. So if we come up here to the definition of the user session, as you'll recall, this was the thing that checked if we have a refresh token, it requests a new access token, etc., etc., then toggles all of these things. Well, if it comes back and we have a resource owner, so we have a user, at that point we can assume that we can access something. So then we try to call user can access. And I don't know if I've actually defined this function yet. It doesn't look like I have. So the user can access is going to be the thing where we check if we can access a specific page that requires you to sign in. So in our app controllers pages controller, we have this restricted path, right? So this is going to be /pages /restricted. So we want to try to access this and see what happens. We can come over to our main.js. We can paste in our restricted or our user can access. And then in here, what we do is we check, is the access token undefined? If the access token is undefined, what we actually would want to do is try to access it. But right here, because we already have this check, we know that we've tried to grab it and we can't, right? So you can redundantly do a check in here and see, like, if this is undefined, then check if you can get your access token or whatever. But in this case, because we've wrapped it in this weird little session block, we know we don't have it. So in that case, you have to log in, unfortunately. But then we create a const response where we say, do a fetch to localhost port 3000 /pages /restricted. We do a get method. We then say, here's your headers, it's an application /JSON, and here's an authorization bearer token of the access token specifically. So we're not using the refresh token here. We then try to get some data where we await the response, cast it to JSON. We then do a console log in the color of cyan, and we just say console log the data.message because in our pages controller, we told it to render JSON if we successfully are logged in with a message that has this in it. So that's why we're doing the data.message. If there's an error, we console log the error. We tell it, hey, look, you couldn't log in, reset your tokens, reset your user session. Probably not super necessary, but better safe than sorry, I suppose. So again, a lot of this was ChatGPT generated, but it is pretty cool that it managed to sort of keep a context throughout this, even if some of the code's a little bit weird. And as far as I can tell, it does seem to work. So let's go ahead and let's give this a test run as soon as I finish collapsing all of these for the happy chemicals. So we'll come over here. I'll just, oh, look, we already have that. I'll hit Control-Shift-I and we'll start by refreshing. So this should be a new application. So I'm going to do a test at case.com to test this out. I'm going to paste that in as my password and I'm going to click submit. That logs me in. So right here, we can see it says, here's your refresh token, I believe. It then tells us here's your access token. At this point, if we refresh the page, we'll do that check where we can see here that we're logged in and we've accessed the restricted page. The way I have the logic set up in here, this is only going to fire if you refresh the page because I'm sort of mimicking going to another page. You could, of course, force this to like fire every time, I suppose. This is just the way that I sort of had ChatGPT set it up. But at this point, we can log out. If we log out, you'll see logging out. If we refresh, nothing happens. Let's try to log in with test@case.com. We'll click login. You can see here we get another new token that we can use. And now if we refresh, it'll do the same thing where it says you're logged in as blah, blah, blah. So if I refresh a couple times, you can see it continues to work. If I come over to our Rails application and I hit enter a few times and I refresh, we can see all of the stuff that happens when we refresh the page. So it goes through here, it does a whole bunch of stuff, and then eventually it tells us, okay, here is your new API tokens. And then as soon as it's done with this, it comes down here, it does a get to the page's restricted path. And then in here, it sees there's no parameters. It then goes through here, it does a whole bunch of stuff with the access tokens. And then eventually you get down here, it renders the response. And then for the actual response, that is where we are doing the console log of you are logged in as test@case.com. So there you go. That is the entire workflow. It is very, very easy to get up and running. And I'm willing to bet that when I try and do this with React and Vite, it's going to be a much quicker tutorial because, well, in those cases, a lot of the state's not going to be, getting and setting of various HTML elements and doing some of this mock state stuff that we did with the user session. That said, it is very interesting. It's definitely a faster way to get up and running than what I've covered in the past, because I think previously these tutorials were like, an hour long-ish. But, you know, it's also partially because it was a lot of copying and pasting, which I do apologize for. But again, I'll have the code in the video description in case you wanted to take a look at it yourself. But yeah, hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully this was helpful. And hopefully I will see you in the next tutorial.